I'm just now wrapping up my second oxytocin cycle, and the results are about what I would have expected from reading other people's experiences using IGF-1 LR3 receptor grade, Increlex, and certain other peptide protocols that have led to growth of new tissue. What is said is essentially your first cycle is your biggest, and it makes sense if you think about it, because what is happening during these hyperplasia cycles is that we're growing and maturing the satellite cells that have already been activated through training, calorie restriction, metabolic stress, etc., etc. So we've had our entire life to build up and activate those cells that have not necessarily been matured. It's my opinion that that's why your first steroid cycle is always your best. That's why your first 6 months of training are always your best. Each of these circumstances has kind of a different anabolic load or an anabolic potential based on what you're using. If you were to start off as a natural and train for 6 months to a year, you would essentially use up all of the players on the bench. You would essentially start to grow all the seeds that are there and already ready to go to an extent. But after that 6 months or a year, if you were to hit a moderate steroid cycle, for instance, you would see new growth. And maybe you would get it in your head that, hey, this is just how this works all the time. Experienced steroid users know that after that first cycle, returns are diminishing. You have to keep using more and more and different things and different strategies. I believe that's because a lot of what we're experiencing is hyperplasia, not just hypertrophy, not just hypertrophy, growth. We're actually seeing not necessarily a linear progression, which we never really experience, right? There's periods where we plateau, there's periods where we regress slightly, and there's periods where we leap ahead and grow. And I think that's why this is because we're experiencing a two-part process of activating new baby muscle cells and then growing them through overfeeding, through reduced training with greater recovery, through anabolics, through, see, it all works. Bulking works, this works. It just works for a limited amount of time. Perhaps this is why. And so I am experiencing about, as they say, and as expected, half the results of my first oxytocin cycle. And in the first cycle, I gained about 7-8 pounds of legit muscle, several pounds of fat, several pounds of water. You can go back in the videos and see what I'm talking about. This time around, I would say that I gained about 3 pounds to maybe 3.5 pounds of actual muscle, so about half as much. And to be honest, for a guy that's over 6 foot and 220, 230 pounds, 2 or 3 pounds of legit muscle it's not super, super noticeable. But I've been training for 23 years, and I'm not using a heavy PED load. I'm taking generous TRT, vigorous Steve style, 1 milligram per pound of body weight per week, microdosing, and that's it. No AI, no extra, just what I talk about here. In this case, oxytocin. And lots of food. Phase. I don't think that growing muscle is as linear as I've always believed, or as most of us believe. I think it's a two-step process, and that's why there's plateaus. That's why you shift from putting on muscle to just gaining fat. Insulin sensitivity changes, IGF-1 response changes. All of these things change over time, and instead of fighting it, continuing to try to force it, why not ebb and flow with the natural processes and give yourself a chance to build up more players on the bench for those growth phases. So one of the ways you can do that is nucleus overload, perhaps. We don't have any hard scientific proof of that, but if you want to adjust your training, it would stand to reason that you would want to increase volume and possibly even intensity, but at least volume, right up to the point of overtraining, but not into overtraining where you're having real adrenal fatigue or anything else like that. And the reason is because once you get to that overtrained state, your body is actually less likely to push out IGF-1, MGF, and those factors that need to be in place to stimulate and activate those satellite cells. One of the ways that we can do this, perhaps, potentially, theoretically, is to use nucleus overload. Here's Mike Israel discussing it. These are both very good videos. I'm not going to go deep because they do, and I don't know that much about it. But my basic thinking on it is set yourself up to stimulate the activation of new satellite cells without going into an overtraining mode, but brush right up against it right before you do your big growth phase. So in other words, I hate to be like making a sexual reference here, but if you know what edging is, it's basically getting right up to that point and holding. Okay, so crude reference, but you know what I'm saying. This is basically just push and push without the extra calories, without the anabolics, in a state where you're somewhat depleted. For me, this is what I would do. I would do 6 days of keto to get ready for a fast, do 2 weeks of dirty fasting, and then 2 weeks of acclimating where I'm eating and really ramping up my training. So I'm doing some activity through the fast and then ramp up that training without any kind of anabolics, without any kind of oxytocin, without any kind of IGF-1. And then after 2 weeks of that, I should be in a state where I'm just about to be overtrained. At that point, pull back on my training, eat more, bump those calories up, and then start whatever you're going to do. For me, next time around, it'll be actually IGF-1 LR3 receptor grade, so we'll see how that goes. But that's my technique. Now, what's a less hardcore technique if you don't feel like fasting, if you don't feel like doing all those hoops, right? So what's the moderate option? Okay, moderate option would be time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, depending on what you want to call it. I know there's all kinds of arguing in there about what's what. Semantics, who cares? The point is that you're putting yourself in a metabolically restricted state where you're not eating anything except for in a few hours period. Also during the same periods, during these same hours, get your workout in, right? And why? We're trying to limit mTOR production, right? To put ourselves in a place where we're going to activate these cells. We're not in a growth phase. We're trying to create the opposite. So yeah, we're still going to train. We're still going to eat. But we're going to reduce it down to a 2 to 6 hour period. So get a meal in, get a shake in, go to the gym, come home, get another meal in, you know what I'm saying? Get your calories in right around that window. Then for the rest of the day, all the way around, you're not stimulating protein synthesis. You're allowing your body to feed off itself, to have to fight. It's building up your immunities. Intermittent fasting, I did that for 8 years, and I felt great. I was able to maintain weight really well, fullness, etc., but it was really kind of difficult to grow. Perhaps that's why. So in other words, I would do that to set up for the growth phase. I would do that to stimulate the activation of satellite cells, but I would not do that forever, okay? So that's a little bit of a modified way you could do that. You could spend 2 to 4 weeks ramping up your training for a month, doing intermittent fasting, somewhat calorie restricted, either at maintenance, maybe slightly below, just enough, because we want to brush up against overtraining but not actually get there. Then, at the point where you're ready to burst off and grow, bam, throw those calories into high gear, add in whatever you're going to add in, whether that's anabolics, whether that's a peptide, whatever it is that you believe will help you grow, that's the time to do that. Phase, see? So that's the moderate approach. Now, there is a very easy approach, and I don't mean that to put anybody's efforts down, but what I'm saying is a less involved approach. One of my good buddies, very good buddy, what he does is he chooses to use oxytocin at 50 micrograms, so a very small dose by compared to what I might use for a growth phase. I'm going to start at like 100 micrograms a day and maybe go up to 400 micrograms a day over the course of 3 weeks. But what he does is 50 micrograms every other day. That's it. And I've watched over the last few months, and, well, in his words, he says, I've gone down 1 pant size from a 33 to a 32, and I've gained 2 pounds. So take from that what you will. I can see more roundness and definition in his shoulders and arms. old gym buddy of mine. We bump into each other now and again, so I don't see him every day. So I've seen those changes, but he's been using Oxytocin that way. That's it. One shot every other day, small shot, and it's the tortoise and the hare. He's taking the tortoise route, and I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense health-wise. So something like that. So what's happening with him is he's taking that on a training day, stimulating that, and just kind of getting an all-in-one, just little by little, here and there, here and there. And why not? If that works, that works. I kind of enjoy the big bursts. I kind of enjoy going to extremes and trying different things and really say, well, how does this affect and what does this do? So, but there's more than one way to skin a cat.